We're looking at our review. We're going to write stuff for every line. If we write stuff for every line, you get 10 points on your test tomorrow, which is awesome. First of all, chapter 22, the early industrial revolution. I put a link also for the textbook because apparently people may not know there is a textbook, but there is. And so the link is there on the review that I gave you. Chapter 22, what are two new world foods that impact Europe because poor white people can grow them easily, they're hard to kill, they have a lot of calories, and they're super cheap? And? Exactly. Corn and potatoes. Good job, Amy Gibbons. So corn and potatoes. Sorry, Cameron. Make sure you write those two. Those are two new world foods that change Europe. Number two, the most profitable of all crops, though, grown in the New World, even if it's not from the New World, is what? It is sugar. I don't know why you said it like that, but it is sugar. This is the most profitable, and it's the most profitable even though it's a questionable crop because what is used in the production of sugar? Yeah, slave labor. But we don't really care because we're like, that's terrible and all, but I'm not going to like change my diet. Like I mentioned, all of us use slave labor for our phones. I can guarantee none of you are going to give up your smartphone, even though a slave in the Congo mined the cobalt for our phones. That's a fact. We'll feel bad about it, but we're not going to like change anything about our lives. Number three, location and reason for Britain to get the Industrial Revolution. They got it first, and there's four reasons, and I'm sorry about that there's four, but there are four. We're going to write down these four. I wrote mine to the side so that I have plenty of room to the right. But number one of the reasons why Great Britain had the Industrial Revolution first, number one is that they have the largest fleet. When I talk about like a fleet, I'm talking about like a lot of ships. And if you have a lot of ships, then you can like sail from place to place. You can move products and goods. And Great Britain has the largest fleet, which is cool. Number two, Great Britain also has something about their society that makes it possible to have an industrial revolution. Number two, they have what's called social mobility. Social mobility means just because I'm born poor doesn't mean I'm going to die poor. And in fact, there's a lot of people who are middle class because they work their way up to their wealth. And if you live in a society where you know it's possible to become wealthy, that's the environment you want for people to take risks, to start businesses, to start factories. You have social mobility. Number three, there's two things found in the ground in England that you need for an industrial revolution. These are two natural resources. What are they? No oil. We're a little early for oil. No. Industrial revolution is not about crops. Not about crops. This is for factories. Iron is one thing. Iron is super important because we will actually make steel out of iron, which is great for buildings and trains and construction. But I need something to heat up the iron, to melt the iron, to get I need coal. That's the second thing. Because the Industrial Revolution is not about human power running machines or animal power or wind or water power. It's about steam power, right? And how do I get steam? There's just two. I get steam from coal. So we have two things. We have, I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question, Amy. For number three, we have coal and iron. There were two natural resources. There is a fourth reason, though, that the Industrial Revolution started in England. One of the reasons why the Industrial Revolution started in England is that they had natural rivers and ports. Natural rivers are important because before there's freeways, there is rivers. On our high school, we have Fairmont, and Fairmont can be filled with trucks from like these, chemical places. But before there's trucks and roads, there's rivers. And so England has a natural source of rivers and ports that's going to allow business to thrive there. So four reasons why the Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain. Number four, what is a new form of power? We've already talked about not animal power, not human power, not wind power. What's running the machines? No, not little kids. Steam power. Good job, Annabelle. Cameron, your answer of kid power Bizarrely incorrect. They're not like putting kids in like little like hamster wheels. This isn't The Matrix, you know, if you've seen that movie. Okay. Number 5, division of labor. We'll write down specialized and repetitive tasks. Specialized and repetitive tasks. What I mean by this, if I give you the example of fancy plates, what country in the world made all the fancy plates? Yeah, and that's why we call fine up plates, fancy plates, China. We like to talk about the fine China. But because it was like every plate and every pot was like a work of art because it was made by like this dude who knew how to make it, what was true of the cost of China? Super expensive. Now, I want like everyone to have pots and plates and bowls. So I'll tell you what, instead of like this like craftsman who knows what he's doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what if we break it down to like really easy steps? Like, for example, what if one guy all day long you make clay, and another guy you put it on a pottery wheel, and then Annabelle, she's going to just put it in the oven and take it out of the oven, and then Cameron, his job is to wrap it up into a box. All day long, Cameron just wraps things up in a box. All day long, Annabelle just watches the oven. Does that take a lot of skill to just, no. So before the division of labor, people knew how to do everything from start to finish. But now all Cameron does for 9-10 hours is put stuff in a box, put stuff in a box. Now that's going to make it quicker. It's going to make it cheaper. But what's going to be true of your wages? It's going to go down. Now, number 6, mass production. We'll write down products were more available because I'm now cranking out these things. It used to be that most of us would own like 3 types of shirts or whatever, but now we are cranking out clothing. Products are more easily available. Number 7, what are some advances? Cameron, we get that. What are some advances that come with mechanization? Again, what happens to prices? Prices go down, right? Prices go down. And also, they're made quicker, because we're just rapidly producing these things. Prices go down, and things are made even quicker. So those are some of the advances of the Industrial Revolution. Number 8, there is something good and something bad about the Industrial Revolution because there's a crop that we've always had this and we've always made stuff out of it, but there was something challenging about this crop because there was something inside of it that had to be separated by hand. Cotton, right? And we used to have enslaved Africans separated by hand, but it just took a lot of work to make that happen. And so a lot of times, like, enslavers thought it's just not worth it to, like, have my slave do that. But then something was invented that mechanically took out the seed for me. What was that? The cotton gin, this guy named Eli Whitney. And that's great in the sense that it makes cotton actually worth planting and making money off, right? But there's a catch because with the increased production of cotton, well, I mean, that's great. We have clothing. All of us have cotton clothing on right now. But the bad thing? Yeah, it increases slavery. And that's the bad thing. It increased slavery. But again, most individuals are like, yes, I know this increases slavery, but I don't care. And we're the same way today. A lot of our Nike shoes are made in sweatshops in China. I don't think the average American cares. Like, you'll feel bad. Like, if you saw a documentary on YouTube about sweatshop labor and, like, Nike, you'd be like, wow, that's terrible. Anyway, yeah. We can even have Nikes with human blood in it, and it will sell out the first day it's sold.
Nike, so they Nike, yeah.
But it was a Nike shoe, right?
No, well, they company
right?
Customize them.
Right.
That's not nice.
But they are a Nike shoe that is been modified, right? Like I'm not saying Nike made them, but those shoes are Nikes that've been modified.
Like you're
So
saying, like if they weren't Nike, they wouldn't have sold.
I don't think. I mean, if like some random person like, hey, would you like to buy my shoe with human blood? That would just actually be any Walmart shoe, you know. So yeah, that's the funny thing about America is like, if people are willing to buy it, that's capitalism, you know. So human blood, who would have thought? Number 9, James Watt invents something. It'd be more than grandpa. Super important. I mean, there's a reason why we measure things by watts because of this. He doesn't invent electricity. No lightning before James Watt. He invents the steam engine, one of the most important inventions of all time. James Watt. Number 10, what change happens to make communication super quick that if my dad is working in India, I can like message him and get a text back in like 4 minutes? What lines? The beep 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 lines? What are those called? What is it? Not telegram. Telegraph lines. So I think the machine is called a telegraph. I think the message is called a telegram. So, but they have telegraph. The telegraph is a super important invention because before this, it took like a year and a half to like write my dad in India and get word back. Now I can like send an electronic pulse at nearly the speed of light, and I can get a return message like in 4 minutes, which is crazy. That is number 10, change in communication. There's also change in travel because there's something that helps me to get there. Because before getting there, it depends on like, man, I hope that the winds blow today because I'm really hoping to sail there quickly. But now we have what kind of ships? We have steamships or steamboats. Changes in travel and communication. Number 11, impact of industrialization compared with the rest of the non-Western world. Is India and Pakistan and Africa and China, are they making factories in the same way Europe is? They're not. And actually, this is where there's that turning point in human history. This is the time, because Europe went through a scientific revolution, because Europe went through an industrial revolution, they're going to be leaving the rest of the world behind. We'll write down where it says impact that the West dominated the non-West. This happened economically. It's going to happen militarily. In fact, we just saw an example of this. What country did Napoleon invade and defeat, and they were shocked that it happened to them? No. No. No.
The Ottoman Empire, but I don't know.
It was part of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, but I don't know what country.
These kids should know because we literally just talked about it forever. Muhammad Ali tried to fix that problem by modernizing his part of the Ottoman Empire. Oh, I'm heartbroken. It was Egypt. Egypt was invaded. I'm not even going to like string this out anymore because it's so disappointing. No, I should. I'm so disappointed right now. So anyway, the non-West was dominated by the West. Number 12, urbanization, and the poor cities were overcrowded and they were polluted because all these poor people are moving to the cities for these factory jobs. And they were overcrowded, they were dirty, they were dirty cities. Remember, like they dumped waste right into the rivers. And this is where we like introduced the topic of like modern water pollution with DuPont chemical. Remember we said that people from the country weren't used to living in the city, so they literally just like threw their like waste, poo, and pee like out the window. Cities were overcrowded and they were polluted. Number 13. A family's made up of a father, wife, a mom, and children. Of those three, the mom, the dad, and the kids, which ones went to work in the Industrial Revolution?
Mom and kids.
The dad stayed home.
No, all of them. So
Oh, all of them. And so for the first time, we'll write down, we see separation of the family. The mom goes out to work, making clothing. The dad is doing various jobs. And the kids, what kind of terrible job do the kids often have? Because they're small. They can do factory work because like some of what happens if that machine gets jammed? I need someone with little hands. So either I can have Sarah, the junior, get in there with her little baby hands and like open that thing up, or I can get like a 6-year-old. So, interchangeable, interchangeable. Also, minds are important. Like if you ever remember that old movie, Snow White, like Snow White lives with what kinds of people? Dwarves, right? And they're minors because they're like small. They have to, well, kids are small too. So they send kids into these mines. And so we'll write down that it's separated the family. Number 14, there is one social class that does the best during the Industrial Revolution. It's because they're the ones who own the factories. They're the ones who are not going to be content with not being wealthy. They're going to work their way to their wealth. Who are those people?
the rich plantation.
Well, we're not talking about plantations. We're talking about factories in like Birmingham,
The factory owners.
What social class? There's 3 social classes: lower class, middle class,
middle.
upper. It's not upper class people are born rich. If you're born a billionaire, I don't know if you're gonna be like, I think I'm gonna hang out in a sweatshop and like micromanage girls, But it's middle class people
Capitalism.
because of capitalism. Speaking of capitalism, there's one of the most important books ever written called The Wealth of Nations, written in 1776 by the most famous Scotsman ever. Wealth of Nation does argue for capitalism. Who wrote the most important book on capitalism ever? No. Not with a W.
Oh, Carl something?
No, that's
Not Karl Marx.
Oh, that's the
Communist Manifesto.
That's the opposite of this philosophy. The philosophy of capitalism that gave us Popeyes and iPhones and Netflix and Disney. Without this man, none of this, our modern world, would be possible. And you can't name him? This is a problem. It is not Tyler. Not Tyler. It is Adam something. Adam who? Good job, Amy Gibbons. Adam Smith. Thank you. And actually, this has been a struggle all day. 80% of the sophomores have no idea who Adam Smith is. But we've talked about it. Thank you, Amy Gibbons. And thank you for setting her up for that one.
I just remember the last name.
Adam Smith. And again, you should know he starts what's called capitalism. Capitalism, which gives us our modern world. And he's very much against something. In fact, there's a French word, laissez-faire, that kind of explains what he's against. Because I don't know if you remember. Give me 1 second, Samantha. Laissez-faire literally means like leave them alone, let it be. And it's like his view about government and business. Samantha, what's his view on government and business? Government should back off. We'll write down against government intervention. The government should not get involved. Against government intervention. A good example would be Disney World versus Disneyland. Disneyland has been closed for 12 months. Disney World's been open. Disney World has shown incredible profits. Disneyland, thousands of people have been laid off. Florida has the exact same infection and death rate as California. Adam Smith would say the government of California messed up. When they closed Disneyland, they hurt people's jobs, and there's a death rate which is the exact same as Florida, which never closed Disney World. Government intervention, Adam Smith would say, was a bad thing. One last thing to write down. What if you feel uncomfortable with regulation? What if you, with government not getting involved? Well, Adam Smith said, don't worry, because there's something that's actually driving the car of the economy. Something's on the steering wheel of the economy, the car of the economy. And it's not something like visible. What is that called? You'll write down, still for Adam Smith, the invisible hand. There is an invisible hand that the government doesn't have to get involved. Adam Smith would even say that's true with our mask mandates, because is there a mask mandate in Texas right now? No, and actually the infection rate has gone down. But if you go to HEB, do you have to wear a mask still?
Yeah.
You do, because right now the government does not make a law. HEB and Starbucks, they are free to make their own decision. And most, not all, most places still say, we want you to wear the mask. Adam Smith will say that's fine. The invisible hand is driving the mask mandate. The government doesn't have to dictate it. The government doesn't have to threaten you with a fine. On their own, HEB says, our workers are more comfortable with the mask mandate, we'll just have it. Starbucks says, our workers want it, so we'll do it. Adam Smith says, government didn't have to get involved. And guess what? No mask mandate, and the infection rate has gone down in Texas in 2 weeks. Adam Smith would say, this is what I have to bring. Number 16, socialism and communism. This is pro-government intervention. This is pro-government intervention. They want the government to get involved. In fact, if there's a poor family and a rich family, what should the government do to get involved with the poor families? Yeah, they want to like redistribute the wealth. They want to help. They want the government to get involved. Oakland, California, just this month is starting a new program. They're going to give $500 a month to poor black families and only poor black families. And so if you are like a poor white person living in poverty, you will not get a check from the government. If you're a poor black person, you will get $500 a month. This is an example of government involvement. Socialism says that the government should get involved and make these decisions. Chapter 23, Enlightenment versus Scientific Revolution. Now, the scientific revolution is about like nature, like rules like astronomy and physics, stuff like that. Well, if that's what the scientific revolution is about, like the scientific revolution is about like nature and like the universe, what's the Enlightenment about? Yes, so we'll write down its rules of human society. Human society includes religion. Human society includes social classes. The Enlightenment says that there's rational laws or rules about human society. That's what the Enlightenment's about. Just like it's not like, oh, my water bottle fell to the ground. I guess angels pulled it to the ground. No, there's like physics behind that. There's like rules behind that. If there's rules to nature, I bet there's rules to human society, like religion, like government, like social classes. And one of the guys who is an Enlightenment thinker is none other than John Locke, who said all of us are born with natural rights, inalienable rights. We can write down natural rights. And John Locke said that these rights are not given by a government. I don't have rights because of the Constitution. I have God-given rights. And if a government tries to take away my God-given rights, I can and should. I should rebel. Yeah, absolutely. Another Enlightenment thinker is a guy named Rousseau. And Rousseau wrote a famous book, we'll write it down, called Social Contract. If you have a phone contract, what do you give to the phone company every month?
Money.
And what do you get from them every month, hopefully? Data, right? A data plan. But if they don't actually give you internet, or you just have job calls, what do you do with that contract you have with them? Yep, and that's the same thing with government. That government only exists because I have a contract with them. I will pay them taxes. They will give me services. But the moment they don't live up to their end, I don't have to live up to my end. You see, people used to believe that a king's in charge because who put them in charge in this older way of thinking? God. That was called the divine right of kings. Rousseau says, nope. There's a word you should write down next to Rousseau. It's the word consent. The only reason a government rules is they have my consent. They have my permission. That's Rousseau. Number 20, Absolutism and the Enlightenment. So it turns out there are rulers that are like dictators, And a word for that is absolutism. They're absolute rulers. And it turns out some dictators in the 1800s actually really liked the Enlightenment. And one of the reasons they liked the Enlightenment is that the Enlightenment just didn't criticize government. You know what else it criticized? What else did it criticize? It criticized government for sure. But what else did the Enlightenment criticize? It criticized traditional religion. In fact, like Thomas Jefferson was a type of a believer called like a deist. He didn't believe in Jesus, but he wasn't an atheist. And you know what's good about having people criticizing religion? Let's say that you believe in God less and you trust God less. Who has to be strong enough to solve all of your problems? Yeah, the smaller your God, the bigger the government has to be. And so for absolutism and the Enlightenment, it questioned traditional religion. Love that. Because if you can't trust your traditional religion, you're going to want a government big enough to solve the world's problems. This is why communist nations are officially atheist, because if you don't have a God, who's going to solve your problems? Nobody. They're officially an atheist country. That's a good question. It's a different question. And I would say many still are influenced by Buddhism and thought like that. But a lot of them are atheists because that's where they're trained in from childhood. Women in the Enlightenment. Middle class women are really important. I don't know if you remember, but women threw parties. They did. Those parties, do you remember what they were called? No, that's something else, and that's something men are interested in. And it's not about talking philosophy and politics with your girlfriend. They're called salons. We'll write down a salon, S-A-L-O-N. Salon, like we use that word for like women get their hair done, and like in a salon, women, chit chat, talk gossip or whatever stereotypically. But these salons were like parties held by upper class or middle class women. And like you're a middle class woman, so you have like a living room as big as like 4 classrooms. And so instead of like, oh, let's have a party where we're like getting drunk, like let's have a party and debate Adam Smith, like let's talk about laissez-faire economics. Let's talk about, and that's what middle class women did. Middle class women helped to spread the Enlightenment. Thanks, middle class women. Number 22, what social class made the most out of the Enlightenment? They were most impacted by the Enlightenment. It'll be the middle class. Number 23. There's something called the French Revolution. The French Indian War, sometimes called the 7 Years' War. And even though Great Britain won that war, the thing about that war is they charged that war on the government credit card. And so what did they want to ask the American colonies to do to pay for that war? Yeah, they wanted to raise taxes. It led to higher taxes. And so the context of the American Revolution is the French Indian War, or sometimes called the 7 Years' War. It led to higher taxes, and that's why the Americans said, we don't want to pay your higher taxes.
Wait, y'all are I thought y'all were past American Revolution.
We are. This is a review.
Oh, okay.
Number 24, there's a guy named Thomas Payne, great example of Enlightenment thinking. And Thomas Payne said, we're not going to rebel because we're like, oh, forget you, England, you suck. We're going to rebel because we have reasons and rational thought behind our revolution. In fact, Thomas Sense writes a book that is a whole book of rational reasons why we can rebel. What is that book called?
Common sense.
It's called Common Sense, right? And that's a good example of Enlightenment thinking. Also, we also have something called the Declaration of Independence, which is not like we're rebelling because we're tired. We're just done with you. It's like here are rational reasons for a revolution. Another revolution that happens is the French Revolution. A couple of causes we'll write down in the French cause of the French Revolution. Well, there's financial problems, and specifically, what estate? Remember, there's 3 estates: the first, second, third estate. What estate was like suffering the most?
The third.
Yeah, we'll write down there's financial problems with the third estate. You might remember they're the only ones who really got taxed. They were the ones who were like prostituting themselves out to feed their families. They were the ones who were like abandoning children in the streets. The third estate was not really getting representation. And so, because they didn't get representation with their taxation, they decided to rebel. It says on the handout that there is a guy, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Who are they? They're the king and queen of France, and they're kind of like symbols. They're kind of symbols of waste because of their lifestyle, of how they use their money. I mean, Louis is paying for an American revolution he cannot afford. Marie Antoinette is having parties. Her dogs may eat more dessert than third estate members in these lavish parties that she has. And that leads us to number 27, 4 symbols of the French Revolution. What is that palace called where the king and queen live? That's Versailles, right? They live in Versailles. That's their palace. And that's like this symbol of like opulence and waste. What is the building? There was a rumor that there was a prison that the government was like arresting people, and the government's so oppressive, they're being thrown into jail. And they stormed the prison, beheaded a bunch of workers there, and it turned out, oops, no one was there, other than like crazy people. What was that prison called? No. That's called the Bastille. Bastille. That's the second symbol of the revolution, the Bastille. They stormed the Bastille. It's the July 14th is when it happened. It's the start of the French Revolution. There's a third symbol of the revolution. What is that thing called that they used to like kill thousands? The guillotine, right? Thousands of people were beheaded with the guillotine. And there's a fourth and final symbol of the revolution. What document did the French Revolution produce that argued for their Enlightenment ideas of why they were going to revolt? We have our Declaration of Independence. They have their document's called the Declaration of the Rights of... Wow. No. Rights, the Declaration of the Rights of Man. So we have our Declaration of Independence, our foundational document. They have a document, Declaration of the Rights of Man. Wow, that was rough. There's a guy named Robespierre, and there is Versailles, there is the Bastille, there is the guillotine, and there's the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Robespierre leads this kind of roller coaster time of the French Revolution where people are being randomly accused and things are getting canceled. What do we call that time period in France? No. The Reign of Terror. Robespierre was in charge and then he got canceled.
Yeah. I'll fix that up.
Number 29, long-term consequences of the French Revolution. Was this a success or was it a failure? Annabelle's right. They actually got a dictator. Who's the dictator they got? They got Napoleon, and then after Napoleon died, they went right back to having a king and queen. So long-term, the French Revolution was a failure in establishing democracy.
It was funny.
Number 30, a popular authoritarian in the French Revolution. We mentioned him. This guy was popular, and even though he was a dictator, he promised to like restore order and bring things back to normal in France. That guy was a general. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. An authoritarian means someone that has like total control or whatever, and he did. When Napoleon took over France, what did he do to like literally the rest of Europe? Lives peacefully side by side. We just want to give you money and just like hold hands and like, what did Napoleon do to all of Europe? No. He conquered all of Europe. Except for 2 countries. One country he tried to defeat, it was like his equal, and he couldn't beat them up because they had like a great navy and they're an island.
Great Britain.
Yeah, so he conquered all of Europe failed to take Great Britain. And the only other exception was Russia. He tried to defeat Russia. So Napoleonic Wars, he conquers most of Europe except for Britain, except for France. The importance of Haiti, what do they grow in Haiti that makes me a ridiculous amount of money? Sugar, right? And that actually is the wealthiest island on planet Earth. Causes of tension in Haiti, there's different social classes. Who's the top of social class in Haiti? There's a group of people called the free whites. Below the free whites were, oddly to some, what kind of free people? The free blacks. There was a third group of people, which were poor whites. And the last were slaves. Guess what? Those four groups did not get along. Free black people, you know what free black people own in Haiti? Slaves. And when the French Revolution happened, they're like, yeah, all that craziness, perfect time for us to, I don't know, rebel. And this is the first free black nation on the planet from former enslaved peoples, which is awesome. Last one, Toussaint Louverture, he was the black enslaved man who led the Haitian Revolution. And sadly, though they fought for their freedom, we could not support or encourage or acknowledge it. Why?
Because we had slaves of our own.
We have slaves. That's part one done.